Hello everyone and welcome back to the History of Diving Museum. My name is Emily and today we are going to talk a little bit about why it's important not to remove artifacts from historical or cultural sites that may be found underwater or even on land. Now, before the 1970s and 80s, a lot of people, if they came across something while snorkeling or diving or walking through the woods, would often take it because they thought, oh, this is really neat, it's old, it's historic, I want to put it on my coffee table or my mantelpiece. And the issue with that is that one, the artifact was losing its pervenience by being taken out of the context that it was in. And two, and most importantly, is it was losing the heritage and the history behind it, which actually belongs to everyone. An archaeological artifact, whether prehistoric, historic, is everyone's histories. It's not just one person's. So in the 1970s and 1980s, there were several state laws and federal laws put in place to protect archaeological sites and artifacts from disturbance. And the main purpose of that was to protect the pervenience of them. And the pervenience is one of the key factors that is the reason why you do not want to remove an artifact from its spot. So what is pervenience? Pervenience is basically the story behind an artifact. It kind of tells the who, what, where, when, how. An example of that would be, if a ship sinks, what country was it from? Where was it going? What was its cargo? Who were the people on board? And if an artifact is found and taken out of that place, maybe it could tell the story of other things that would be potentially found around it as well. And an example of the pervenience situation is these items on my left. Not too long ago, we had a gentleman come into the museum that decades ago, while he was out in the Upper Keys, found a shipwreck site and thought, oh, I'm going to take some of this stuff because I recognize it. Pretty cool. And then it sat in his house for decades. And while he was cleaning these things out, he decided, oh, well, maybe the History of Diving Museum could use these. And so he brought us some of these artifacts. And what you can see with them is, and the problem with it is, he doesn't remember where exactly the shipwreck was. He didn't know what the name of it was, how old it was, and since that was decades ago, the chances of that wreck still being there are possibly slim to none. Or it could be buried, it could have been picked over by other people. But some of the artifacts that he did find, and this gets into the physicality of why you do not want to remove things, is he did not have the tools or the knowledge to actually preserve the artifacts or to clean them up to then preserve them. And this is a prime example. So you might guess that this is a large nail, and that's what we assume it is. We can't fully tell because we can't see what's underneath all the corrosion, but it probably was an old iron spike nail that was used to build ships. And we can kind of guess that because of the wider top, the narrow base. Some of the other artifacts that he found are more nail-like. They're thinner, but you can see that it still has the corrosion on it, it has rust on it. When these artifacts were removed from being underwater, they were not preserved properly. They were not put in special solutions, they were not coated in anything, so that is why we have all the corrosion and the rust forming on them. And also there's a piece of probably what would have been copper sheeting that would have covered the hull of a boat. But you can see it's very green, corroded, breaking apart, but we also don't know. This could be just a random piece of metal that's sunk on it. These are issues with the lack of pervenience. We'll never know what shipwreck these were actually part of. We can maybe guess time periods depending on the make of the nails, but we will never know. The opposite side of that is an example that Art McKee, who is one of the famous treasure salvagers here in the Upper Keys, back in the 1940s and 50s, he found several of the shipwrecks from the 1733 Spanish fleet, as well as other ones from the 1600s, from British warships as well. But Art McKee was actually interested in preserving and sharing the knowledge that he found from the shipwrecks. He did detailed excavations. He then preserved his artifacts, which we are lucky enough to have here at the museum. And he actually displayed his artifacts at his own museum for a couple decades until that closed in the late 1970s. And one of an example of that is this preserved spike that was used to build a ship. And because he did the research on it, we know that this spike is from the 1733 Spanish ship, the Capitana, which he is famous for finding a lot of the silver from it. Now, if you see that, he preserved it properly. It has the coating on it, so it protects it from rusting. You see the black nail, and you see the corroded nail. They're very similar in size, so one would guess that they're from a similar type of ship. But we'll never know with this one. But Art McKee was able to make detailed recordings and research properly, and then was able to share this knowledge with everyone else. We also have from the Capitana a part of a cutlass blade. You can see that probably over a couple hundred years underwater, part of the blade did break off and corrode away, but once they did bring it back up to the surface, they were able to preserve what they could from it. And what's great about these artifacts, because we have the provenience with them, we're able to put these on display. We can have proper signage telling the story behind them, where they came from. The artifacts that do not have the provenience, we can't put on display because we don't know where they're from. We don't actually know maybe exactly what they are. But the benefit of these is we can use them for educational outreach. So when we go to schools, we can have kids actually handle these, touch them, feel them, and we can also use it as an example of the difference between things that don't have, a background context versus the ones that do, that get to stay on display here at the museum. And in a little bit, we are going to go outdoors in front of the museum and see some of the larger artifacts that are sadly in the process of their decay, and that a lot of people see throughout the Keys that were not preserved properly. And I will leave you with this to think about before we go outside. If you are snorkeling or diving and come across an artifact that looks like it might have been from a ship or something like that, do not touch it. Leave it where it is. Mark, when you get back to your boat, make a recording of your position, and then contact the folks over at NOAA. They have archaeologists on staff that then can, depending on your coordinates, see if it's a site they might know about already or if it's a new one. And they are always more than happy to actually help people and educate people and get them involved with the learning process behind it. There are also other great resources like the Florida Public Archaeology Network. They do terrestrial and underwater-based archaeology and do workshops and get people involved with archaeology the proper way rather than just taking things. I will include information about those organizations in the description for this, so if you do ever find something, or if you've got questions, you can reach out to them and ask. So, thank you for joining us, guys. I'll see you in a little bit on the outside, and we'll talk later. Have a good one.